Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lion's Den Show. And here's your host, Cody Robert Judy.
Hello and welcome to the Lion's Den. I'm your host and your toast, Cody Robert Judy. Sometimes I think there's so much to talk about, I'm never going to get it all done. Today's show I want to dedicate to Mr. Moms. You may remember the show Mrs. Doubtfire. I think Robin Williams starred in the role, which was a show about a dad who was so crazy about his kids that he would literally dress up like a maid or a woman in order to get close to them. I've had such a tremendous struggle in the regard, and I'm sure I'm not alone. Dads everywhere go through a pain and a struggle that is often never mentioned and never recognized. Whether that has to do with the male macho persona attributed to a high dose of testosterone slammed down with 2 bits of he doesn't care and a dash of Iron Man who's not supposed to, or to something resembling a black-eyed demon from hell who couldn't change a diaper and has a great time with a 6-pack of beer screaming obscenities at cars around the track of the Indy 500. I'm not sure. But personally, I'm more of a subscriber to the country music song with the lyrics that relate the sensitive side and heartfelt sentiment. Who says grown men don't cry? I know that behind every man there's a little boy, and behind that little boy was a mother that almost never expected that little boy to grow up. But there's always a dad who was just a little boy not too long ago. How often are men discriminated against with their children as the Annie of the high-stakes game of divorce? What I have been through the last 6 months resembles a horror movie, but I've been through it before. So that seems like a bad sequel, like Smokey the Bandit 3 was, where more cop cars being crashed begin to lose its fizzle, and the dirty sheriff remarks of "some bitch" you begin to wonder, may have been a person in his life rather than a cuss word that was tamed down a little. The first chapter in this latest movie begins with everything going okay. I was served the divorce at my house where we lived together. Of course, that was a bit of a shock to me, as anyone might expect. I was tending my son, playing with him, as dads would at home. Just as soon as I filed a reply that was a little bit more get up than lay down and take it, everything changed from July 16th, when I just finished taking my son and his mom swimming and eating dinner together, to around July 21st, when her lawyer informed her that things weren't going to go smooth, and I received a disconcerting letter from her stating such. All of a sudden, in their eyes, my eyes had turned black, and I had grown a tail, and a couple of horns had splintered out of my head. All of a sudden, I was kicked out of my house, as I've related to you, into a utility trailer to sleep, and at the same time, I was all of a sudden completely incompetent and even dangerous around my son. This attitude prevailed for 6 weeks. I literally had my son kidnapped from me with crazy and delirious notion that somehow I posed a danger to my son and was a candidate for fleeing out of the state as a disingenuous parallel to my first marriage. Where that assertion was made, I had fled the state with my 3 other kids, when in fact it was known the exact opposite had actually happened. My first ex had taken my first 3 out of the state to her parents in Utah, and when the 2 weeks of vacation was over, she said she wasn't coming back. And it took an act of God almost to get her back in the state of California, our residence, and a divorce filed and served upon her. But that case, I had received joint custody, and she'd been reprimanded by the judge that I was the father and she couldn't do that. But it fell on deaf ears. Just as soon as that case was settled and things had settled down, I was fighting a foreign extradition of the case that had been settled. It broke me financially, and I couldn't fight it from 1,000 miles away, and everything got turned inside out, and I lost those kids, and they were brainwashed so bad, just to a point of no return. I vowed that would not happen with this case of my 18-month-old son. As you can see, I have paperwork right here that says Dad cares. Finally, after 6 grueling weeks of being completely separated from my son, I talked her into meet me into a neutral place for a visit. McDonald's, Happy Land. It's always a good place for kids. She had promised to meet me there, and 2 hours rolled by without a word. I was near the end of my rope after 6 weeks and sketched a missing child text to the outside family members that I was ready to send to law enforcement officials if she didn't show up. At that exact same time, she rolled up the visit at McDonald's. I was so excited to finally see my son after 6 weeks. I thought she'd finally seen the error of her ways, and as soon as she got there, I was at the car door, just excited to see my little boy. She had the back door locked and her window rolled down and talking to me. Everything was normal, and I wasn't mad. I was excited and happy to see him. She said she was waiting for a text, but didn't say who from. Finally, it came through, and it was from her brother. The text that I had just sent expressing my concern for my missing son. She was angry and mad about the embarrassment and the text that text had caused her. So rather than thinking of our son and being peeled away for the last 6 weeks, she threw the car in reverse and peeled out. Meantime, my foot was under the expeditious reverse peel out of her wheel. While demonizing me as a threat all the time, she had withheld my son from me for 6 weeks. She tells law enforcement officials she felt threatened, and they dismissed the hit and run with the vehicle. At least I actually got to see my son in the back seat. A few weeks goes by, and back to the court we find ourselves. Our attorney moves to strike the police report of the hit and run, and he's using the fact I don't have a place to live against me as a basis for not getting more time with my son. She basically just got away with it by simply asserting her anger at me for making public her own actions. I have got to find a place, and I have got to get moved in and set up my house, or face not getting visits with my own son. I do that in nothing short of a miracle in regards to my income and the circumstances at the time. So finally the judge tells her, hey, you can't do that. He's the father. He has a right to visit. In fact, in the best moment in court so far, Commissioner Gardner tells her that boy needs to bond with his dad. And he shocks her when he almost laughs at her and her attorney when they ask for supervised visits and insist that I pay for them. Don't forget that I have watched my son a ton, and when she's at work. I'm not a stranger to this rodeo, but the new arena of court, she's gone completely haywire and is doing everything she can to demonize me. So man, what a joy to finally, after 6 weeks of having my son just literally kidnapped from me, to finally get a 4-hour visit twice a week. Commissioner Gardner also asked her how she would feel if she would if he signed an order keeping her from her son for 6 weeks. And he almost yells at her, wouldn't you find that a little devastating? And she's nodding yes. Then he says, what makes you think his heart is any different than yours? Wow, I was so relieved to hear those words come out of his mouth. But the whole point is, why does he have to utter those words in the first place? Didn't she lose her mind in the war or something? There was no war. This is just something women think that women can actually get away with on a regular basis. He's a little guy, so he takes naps. I was getting my visits from 8 to noon. Well, this was a convenience for her because she's working her job at the time. Anyway, do you think she would let him sleep for an extra hour or so when he was so tired? No, he had to be back exactly at 12. What for? Well, to hang out at her work for a few hours rather than sleep. She would deny him a sound nap in spite of me, with no regard for his feelings. I fought that. And the judge said, listen, I told the judge, listen, I'm not trying to take her time away from my son. She's working. And the days I don't have him, a babysitter does. Is it my time as a parent more important than a babysitter's? Why shouldn't I have first right? Which means in the choice of a babysitter or a parent, the parent is given the first choice to watch the child. Finally, after months, I managed that. I am so excited to get my son instead of a babysitter having to raise him. Now here is the kicker. I get him when she's working. I get him from about 7:30 a.m. to around 4 p.m. 8.5 hours, 9 hours during the day. And I have to provide him everything during that time. I also get him overnight on the weekends one day. So I'm providing 2 meals a day, a roof over his head during the time, and the judge orders me to pay child support. So she doesn't pay daycare at all. I feed him more than half the meals and provide a place for him, and the court orders me to pay child support. Now tell me that isn't disingenuous and a perfect representation of unfairness that represents what's happening to the justice in the divorce cases. A discrimination of gender, with our children paying a very high price and dads paying a very high price for it also. I've said divorce is highway robbery. You never get anything but you didn't already have. And more than often you lose control of what was yours and than what you had in the first place. I've gained nothing with all this paperwork. I have gained nothing that I already didn't have. But I think if I had to hire an attorney to do this, I'm sure it would have been $15,000 by now. I'm sure that there are women out there who perhaps would act differently. There are always examples of good and bad in each gender, but without examples that people get to know a little bit, a general consortium of gender pressure cannot exist. And that's the reason that I've shared a little personally with you. It's time dads were allowed to be dads, and just because you're a woman living in a workforce, you don't always get your way, and the best of both worlds are not always yours to have. Especially when your idea of the best of both worlds sacrifices time with dad to a babysitter. This dad has won his time and won his son from the babysitter. And please excuse me while this demonized dad gets back to Legos and story time.